Claire looked out the window where sunlight glittered off the wet leaves. "It still hurts," she said. "But I learned something about pain. You can't bury it forever. You just learn to carry it without letting it crush you." That afternoon, Evan stayed downstairs longer than usual. They talked about simple things: groceries, the weather, how messy the attic was. He offered to help clean it up. Claire laughed, surprised. "You? Volunteering for housework?" He grinned, the first real smile she'd seen from him in months. "Don't get used to it." They worked side by side for hours, clearing old boxes, dusting shelves, sorting Mark's old sheet music into neat piles. Every once in a while their hands brushed and they'd both pause, pretending not to notice. There was a quiet comfort in those small, shared moments, the kind of comfort that didn't need words. As they worked, Claire found herself studying him. The way he carried himself, the way he smiled with just one corner of his mouth, like his father used to. But there was something uniquely Evan to a softness, a thoughtful silence that drew her in. At one point, she opened a box and pulled out an old photograph Mark, standing behind a younger Evan, both laughing, their hands on the piano keys. She stared at it for a long time before handing it to him. He took it carefully, his thumb brushing over the image. "I remember that day," he said quietly. "He told me I'd be better than him one day, and were you?" She asked gently. He looked up, meeting her eyes. "No, but I'm trying." Claire smiled. "That's enough." They continued cleaning until the sun began to set, painting the attic in shades of gold and rose. When they finally sat down to rest, Evan looked around the room and said, "You know, I used to hate this place. It always felt like a reminder that he was gone. And now?" She asked. "Now it feels like he's still here." Claire nodded, her heart full. "He always will be, Evan. Just listen. He's in every note you play." That evening, they made dinner together for the first time in years. It was simple pasta and salad, but it felt like a celebration. The house, once so quiet and hollow, seemed to breathe again. They talked easily, laughed a little, and when Evan told a story about his father burning toast every morning, Claire laughed so hard she had to wipe her eyes. Later, when she went to wash the dishes, she caught her reflection in the kitchen window. There was something new in her face. Not joy exactly, but something close to it. Maybe hope. That night, after Evan went to bed, Claire found herself back in the attic. The piano stood there, silent and waiting. She sat down, her fingers trembling slightly, and played a few soft notes. It had been years since she'd touched it. Her hands were rusty, but the music came back in pieces, like memories waking up after a long sleep. Halfway through the song, she heard a soft creak. She turned. Evan stood in the doorway, smiling. "Couldn't sleep," he said quietly. "Guess music runs in the family." Claire chuckled softly. "Guess it does." He walked over, standing beside her. "You play better than I do," he said. She shook her head. "No, you play with your heart. That's better than any technique." He smiled at that, a small, grateful smile. For a few moments they just sat there, a mother and her stepson, two broken souls finding comfort in the same melody. The air between them felt lighter, warmer. When she finally stood to leave, Evan said, "Claire, thank you." "For what?" "For being here. For not giving up on me." Her eyes softened. "That's what family does, Evan. We hold each other up, even when it hurts." As she walked down the stairs, she felt something inside her finally ease, like grief itself was beginning to turn into something gentler. And upstairs, as Evan began to play again, she realized what he had really been playing with all along. Not just his father's old music, not just his memories. The first snow of the season came quietly, blanketing the world outside in soft white. The Bennett house glowed warm against the gray sky. Inside, the scent of hot chocolate drifted through the air. Claire Bennett stood by the window, watching snowflakes fall, her heart oddly peaceful. It had been months since that night in the attic. Since then, something had changed, not in loud or obvious ways, but in small, gentle ones. Evan came by more often now. He'd begun visiting every weekend, bringing groceries, fixing things around the house. Sometimes just sitting in silence with her. It felt natural, easy. The weight of the past had softened between them. That evening, he called from upstairs. "Claire, can you come up here for a second?" She climbed the stairs, curious. The attic door was open, and the warm glow of candles flickered inside. When she stepped in, she stopped. The piano was clean and polished. Around it were framed photographs of Mark, of Evan as a child, even of all three of them together. In the center, laid neatly on the piano, was a sheet of music. "I finished it," Ivan said quietly, his eyes shining with pride and something deeper. Claire walked closer, her heart swelling. "You finished your father's song." He nodded. "The one he never completed. I found parts of it in his old notebook and I added my own ending." She sat beside him, the wooden bench creaking slightly. "Play it for me." Evan took a deep breath, his fingers hovering over the keys. When he began to play, the room filled with warmth and sorrow all at once. The melody started softly, Mark's notes, familiar and nostalgic, but then shifted into something new. Something unmistakably Evan's. It was slower, deeper, almost like the song had grown up with him. As the music unfolded, Claire felt her chest tighten. She could hear Mark in it, his laughter, his kindness, and she could hear Evan too. The ache of a boy who had lost too soon, now becoming a man trying to hold on. Halfway through, Evan's voice broke the rhythm. "I didn't just lose him, Claire," he said, still playing softly. "I lost my home. My family. After he died, I didn't know where I belonged anymore." She turned to him, her throat aching. "You never lost your family, Evan. You just stepped away for a while." He looked up, his eyes glistening. "It felt wrong coming back here. Every corner reminded me of him, and of how much I didn't say when I had the chance." Claire placed her hand gently on his shoulder. "We all have words we never said. That's part of being human." He stopped playing for a moment, the last note hanging in the air. "Do you ever still miss him?" "Every day," she said softly. "But missing him isn't the same as being lost without him. I think he'd want us to live, to keep finding joy where we can." Evan nodded slowly. Then he took a shaky breath and began to play again. This time the music carried something different, a quiet strength. Claire closed her eyes, listening, her hands still resting on his shoulder. It was as if the song itself was speaking for both of them, saying all the things they couldn't. When the final note faded, the attic fell into silence. Only the sound of wind against the window filled the space. Claire opened her eyes, realizing tears had streaked her cheeks. Evan looked at her carefully. "You okay?" She smiled through the tears. "It's beautiful, Evan. You gave it an ending your father would have loved." He smiled faintly, his gaze soft. "I wasn't sure if it was right." "It's perfect," she said, "because it's yours." For a long time they sat there, side by side, saying nothing. The kind of silence that spoke louder than any words. Then, in a quiet voice, Evan said, "You know, when Dad married you, I didn't understand what he saw in you at first." Claire looked at him, eyebrows raised in mild amusement. "Oh, really?" He nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. "You were calm. Too calm." He was loud and full of energy. "But now I get it. You balanced him." She chuckled softly. He needed someone to keep him from buying another motorcycle. Evan laughed, and for the first time in years it sounded easy, genuine. Then his laughter faded, replaced by something tender. "He used to say you were the melody he didn't know he was missing." Claire's eyes shimmered. "He said that." "Yeah," Evan whispered, "and I think he was right." The attic went quiet again, the only light coming from the flickering candles. The air between them felt fragile, yet comforting. It wasn't about romance or anything forbidden. It was about connection to souls learning to breathe again after years of holding their breath. Evan turned to her suddenly. "Claire, thank you." "For what?" "For staying. For keeping this place alive. For not letting him fade." Her voice trembled as she answered. "He's still here, Evan. Every time you play, every time you laugh, he's right there." He looked down at the keys, pressing one softly, letting the note linger. "I think I finally understand what he meant about music keeping the soul clean." She smiled. It does. Because when you play, you let the truth out. Evan stood and began to gather the scattered papers. Claire helped him, carefully stacking the sheet music. Their hands brushed again briefly, but neither pulled away. The touch wasn't heavy or confusing. It was warm, human, when everything was back in place. Evan blew out the candles one by one until the room dimmed into quiet gold. Before they left, Claire turned to look at the piano one last time. It felt alive again. No longer an artifact of loss, but a symbol of what had survived at the door. Evan hesitated. "Do you think he'd be proud of me?" Claire reached up, brushing a loose strand of hair from his forehead like a mother might. "He already was," she said softly. "He always was." He smiled faintly, his eyes wet again. "I wish I could tell him that." The sound came softly at first, faint, almost like the house itself was remembering something. It was a rainy evening, the kind where everything felt slower, quieter, and a little bit lonely. Claire Bennett had just finished cleaning the kitchen when she heard it, the distant, broken tune of a piano. The sound floated down from the attic, where dust and silence had lived for years. She froze mid-step. No one had touched that piano since Mark, her husband, passed away 2 years ago. For a long moment, she thought she was imagining it. The melody was uneven, like someone was trying to remember a song rather than play it. Then she heard it again, clearer this time, with a hesitation that carried pain more than skill. Claire's heart began to beat faster. There was only one person who might be up there. She walked slowly to the stairs, her slippers making no sound on the wooden floor. The air grew cooler as she climbed toward the attic door. Every creak under her step reminded her of memories she had tried hard to bury. Mark's laughter, his deep voice, the way he used to fill the house with music on weekends. The piano had been his favorite place, his peace. When she pushed open the attic door, faint golden light flickered from a small lamp in the corner. The air smelled of dust, old books, and something bittersweet. Maybe the scent of time? There, sitting at the piano, was Evan, her 22-year-old stepson. He didn't see her come in. His shoulders were hunched, his head low, his fingers trembling over the keys as he tried to press the right notes. He looked different than she remembered. The shy boy who once avoided eye contact had become quiet. Distant a man, but one who carried grief like an extra shadow. His hair was a bit longer, his clothes too loose, as if life itself had been weighing him down. The dim light caught the side of his face, and she could see the tears glistening there. He wasn't just playing music. He was crying through it. For a moment, Claire couldn't move. Something deep in her chest twisted. The sight of him brought back so much she thought she had learned to let go of, but hadn't. She remembered Mark sitting right there, teaching Evan simple chords, laughing when he made mistakes. Back then, the house was full of noise, clumsy notes, cheerful laughter, the warmth of a family not yet broken by loss. And now, in that same space, only echoes remained. Evan hit a wrong note and stopped, pressing his hands over his face. His shoulders shook once, then again. Claire felt her throat tighten. She wanted to walk over and hold him, to say something, anything, but she didn't know how. Their relationship had always been polite, careful. After Mark died, Evan had drifted away, visiting less, speaking less, until it felt like he was a guest instead of family. But seeing him now, broken and human, stripped of all his defenses, something inside her shifted. She realized he wasn't just mourning his father, he was mourning the version of himself that had a father. Quietly, stepped forward. The floorboards creaked, and Evan turned sharply, startled. His eyes widened, red and wet, his expression caught between embarrassment and sorrow. "Evan," she said softly, almost whispering, "you play beautifully." He blinked, looking at her like he wasn't sure whether to apologize or smile. "I didn't mean to wake you," he said, voice low and rough. "You didn't," Claire replied. "I just haven't heard that piano in a long time." There was a pause, not awkward, but heavy with meaning. She walked closer, her hand brushing the old piano's wooden edge. It felt cold under her fingers, yet familiar, like shaking hands with an old friend. The light shimmered faintly over the keys. I found some of Dad's old sheet music, Evan murmured, his voice breaking a little. I thought I'd try playing again. But I guess I don't remember much anymore. His words carried guilt, like forgetting the melody was a betrayal. Claire swallowed, her eyes softening. It's okay, she said gently. He'd be happy you're trying. Evan looked down, his fingers tracing the keys. He used to sit right here, he said. Every Sunday. He said music keeps the soul clean. I didn't understand what he meant back then. Claire's chest ached at the memory. He believed music could heal anything, she said quietly, even heartbreak. They both went silent, listening to the rain tapping softly against the roof. It was the kind of silence that wasn't empty. It was full, charged with everything they hadn't said since Mark's death. The grief, the distance, the unspoken care. After a long pause, Evan spoke again. I thought I could handle losing him. But lately, I keep hearing his voice. Every time I walk past this attic, I think I'll hear him laugh again. Claire nodded, eyes glistening. I know. Sometimes I still set 2 cups of coffee in the morning out of habit. A small, sad smile appeared on Evan's face. For a moment, they shared the same kind of pain, the kind that connects more than it separates. The rain outside grew heavier, the sound echoing softly through the attic. Evan played another note, then another, slower this time, but more certain. Claire stood beside him, not saying a word. She just listened. The song was broken, incomplete, but beautiful in its own way, like healing itself. When the melody ended, Evan sighed. It's not the same, he whispered. It's not supposed to be, Claire replied. Some things change. Some stay in our hearts instead. He looked up at her then, really looked, and for a moment she saw the boy she used to know. The one who used to sneak cookies before dinner. The one Mark would chase around the yard with laughter in his eyes. Thanks, Claire, he said softly, for not making me stop. She smiled faintly. Never stop playing, Evan. Sometimes the only way through grief is to let it sing. He nodded, his eyes still shining with unshed tears. Then he turned back to the piano, and this time, the music came smoother, softer. Like forgiveness. Claire stood there a little longer, her heart full of something warm and fragile, not quite peace, but close. She looked around the attic, the dust, the faded photos, the memories stacked in boxes, and realized how much life was still left in those forgotten corners. When she finally walked back down the stairs, the melody followed her. Each note seemed to echo inside her chest, not hauntingly, but comfortingly. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But tonight, for the first time in years, the house didn't feel lonely anymore. It felt alive, and though she didn't say it out loud, Claire knew she hadn't caught her stepson playing a piano. She had caught him playing with his memories, with love, with grief, with everything that made them a family once. And maybe, just maybe, they were both ready to start over, one note at a time. The morning after the rain felt brighter than usual. The sunlight slipped gently through the kitchen curtains, painting soft patterns across the table. Claire Bennett stood by the counter, pouring coffee into 2 mugs. It was something she used to do every day when Mark was alive. The habit had never left her, even after all this time. But today she had a reason. Evan was still home. He walked in quietly, still half asleep, his hair messy, wearing an old gray sweatshirt that once belonged to his father. For a few seconds, neither spoke. The sound of the coffee machine filled the silence. Then Claire turned, offering him a cup with a small smile. "Morning?" she said softly. "Morning," he replied, his voice low and hoarse. He took the cup, his fingers brushing hers by accident. A small spark of awkwardness passed between them, the kind that happens when 2 people share too much silence and too much grief. They sat across from each other, steam curling from their cups. Claire studied him quietly. His eyes were tired but clearer than the night before. Something about him seemed calmer, as if playing the piano had released something heavy. Finally, she spoke. "You used to play with your dad a lot, didn't you?" Evan nodded, eyes fixed on the table. "Yeah. He tried to teach me his favorite songs. But I was too impatient back then. I just wanted to play fast and loud." He gave a small, sad laugh. "Guess I never really listened." Claire smiled gently. You listened more than you think. Last night you played one of his songs, didn't you? He looked up, surprised. You recognized it. Of course, she said softly. That was Autumn Sky. He wrote that for you when you turned 16. Evan froze, his lips parting slightly. I didn't know that. He never told you, Claire said, her voice warm but trembling. He said he'd play it for you one day when you'd learned enough to join him. She paused, swallowing hard. I guess that day never came. The silence that followed was soft but full. The kind of silence that doesn't hurt. It just holds everything between two people who understand. Evan took a deep breath, his eyes glossy. I was just playing with his old sheet music, he said, his voice shaky, trying to remember how it sounded. Claire smiled faintly. You weren't playing with notes, Evan. You were playing with his memories. Her words hung in the air, gentle and true. Evan looked down, his fingers tracing the rim of his mug. Maybe that's all I have left of him, he whispered. No, Claire said. You have more than that. You have his heart. You have his love for music. You have me. For a moment, he didn't answer. Then he nodded slowly, his eyes shining with emotion he couldn't quite name. I don't know how you do it, he said softly. You talk about him like it doesn't hurt. Then tell him through your music, she said. That's what you've been doing all along. They went downstairs together, and as they reached the living room, the faint hum of the furnace filled the silence. Outside, snow kept falling, wrapping the world in quiet peace. That night, Claire sat in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint notes drifting from the attic. Evan was playing again, soft and steady. The song sounded complete now, not sorrowful, but full of life. She closed her eyes, smiling through her tears. For the first time in years, the house didn't echo with grief. It sang with healing. Upstairs, Evan kept playing long after midnight. He didn't notice the time, didn't think about yesterday or tomorrow. For the first time since his father's death, he felt light, like the music had lifted something from his heart. He played until the candles melted down to stubs. And when he finally stopped, he whispered into the quiet goodnight. Dad, the piano sat still, but in the silence. He could almost hear his father's laugh again, distant, proud, and peaceful. And downstairs, Claire whispered to the empty air, Good night. Mark, he's going to be just fine. Spring came quietly to the little house on Willow Street. The snow melted into the soil, birds returned to the trees, and the scent of blooming lilacs filled the air. Claire Bennett stood on the porch one bright morning, coffee in hand, watching the sunlight stretch across the yard. It was peaceful, the kind of peace that takes time to grow after years of pain. It had been nearly a year since that night in the attic, when Evan played his father's unfinished song. Since then, the house had changed in small but meaningful ways. The piano had become the center of their days. Sometimes Evan played while Claire cooked. Other times they sat together, lost in quiet melodies that spoke more than words could. Claire had gone back to teaching part-time at the community center. Evan had started giving piano lessons to kids on weekends. The house, once heavy with grief, now felt full again, not of sorrow, but of life. That morning, Evan walked in from the garden, holding a bunch of wildflowers in his hands. These are for you, he said, smiling shyly. They reminded me of Dad. He used to plant these near the fence, right? Claire took them gently. He did, she said with a soft laugh. He used to say flowers don't just grow, they listen to kindness. Evan smiled. That sounds like him. He looked around the kitchen, now brighter, warmer. It's different here now, he said quietly. Feels alive again. Claire nodded. That's because you're here. This house missed you. He laughed lightly. I missed it too. They shared a small, warm silence. The kind that comes when two people have walked through pain together and found comfort on the other side. Later that afternoon, Claire found a small gift waiting on the piano. It was wrapped simply in brown paper with a note attached. In Evan's handwriting, it said, For the woman who helped me remember how to live. Inside the package was a framed sheet of music, the song Evan had finished for his father. But now it had a new title, What the Heart Remembers. Claire's eyes filled with tears. The notes on the page looked familiar, yet different. Strong, graceful, alive. She sat at the piano, running her fingers over the keys, and played the first few bars. The melody filled the room, gentle and steady. Like a heartbeat. She didn't notice Evan standing in the doorway until he spoke. "You're getting better," he said softly. She turned, smiling. "I've had a good teacher." He walked closer, leaning against the piano. "Do you ever think about him when you play?" "Every time," she said. "But it doesn't hurt anymore. It just feels warm." Evan nodded slowly. "Yeah, me too." They sat together for a while, talking about small things. His students, her classes, the new cafe that had opened downtown. The conversation flowed easily, like two old friends who had known each other in another lifetime. As the sun dipped low, the golden light spilled across the piano. Claire noticed how much Evan had changed. He looked older, more confident, more at peace. There was still sadness in his eyes, but it wasn't heavy anymore. It was gentle, the kind that lives beside love, not against it. That evening they cooked dinner together. Claire chopped vegetables while Evan stirred the sauce, humming one of Mark's old songs under his breath. At one point, their hands brushed as they reached for the same bowl, and both laughed softly. It wasn't awkward. It was just human. After dinner, they went for a walk down the quiet neighborhood street. The air smelled of rain and fresh grass. Evan told her about his plans to move into a small apartment closer to the city. "I'll still visit," he promised. "Every weekend, if you'll have me." Claire smiled a little wistful. "Of course. You don't need to ask." They walked in silence for a while, the evening sky painted in pink and gold. Finally, Evan said, I used to think healing meant forgetting. But I was wrong." Claire looked at him gently. "Healing means remembering just without pain." He nodded. "Exactly." When they got back home, Evan went straight to the piano. "One last song before I go," he asked. Claire sat beside him. "Always." He began to play a new melody, soft, heartfelt, full of quiet emotion. It wasn't sad. It was full of gratitude, like a goodbye that wasn't really a goodbye. Claire closed her eyes, letting the sound wash over her. Halfway through, Evan stopped. "You should play the ending," he said. She looked at him in surprise. "Me?" He nodded. "It's your turn now." Her fingers trembled slightly as she took his place on the bench. She pressed the final keys carefully, the notes rising and falling like a breath. When the last chord faded, she looked up and Evan was smiling. "That was perfect," he said. Claire felt her eyes sting. "You really have your father's heart," she whispered. He shook his head. "No, I think I have a little of yours too." That moment hung in the air, gentle, pure, and full of everything they'd both learned about love. Not the kind that burns too bright or fades too fast, but the quiet kind that stays, steady and kind. A week later, Evan packed his things. Claire helped him load the last box into his car. It was strange seeing him leave again, but this time it didn't feel like loss. It felt like life moving forward. Before he got in the car, he hugged her tightly. "You're going to be okay, right?" he asked. She smiled. "I already am." He nodded, his eyes soft. "I'll call you when I get there. I'll be waiting." She stood on the porch as he drove away, the wind tugging gently at her hair. The house behind her was quiet again, but not empty. That evening, Claire went to the attic. The piano waited in its usual place, the candles from that winter night still sitting by the window. She lit one and sat down, her fingers gliding over the keys. The song she played wasn't Mark's or Evan's this time. It was hers, a soft, hopeful melody that spoke of healing, love, and the way time can turn pain into peace. As the notes filled the air, she whispered, "Thank you, Mark, for bringing him into my life." The flame flickered gently, as if answering. When she finished, she closed the piano lid, smiled through her tears, and looked out the window. The sky was full of stars, bright, endless, alive. And for the first time in a long, long while, Claire felt completely free. She had caught her stepson playing with his memories. But in the end, it was those same memories that saved them both. Love hadn't left the Bennett house after all. It had simply changed its song. And now, at last, it was playing beautifully again.